When my parents handed me the keys to our family home, they wore the kind of smiles that belong in photographs, bright, proud, and carefully rehearsed. "It's yours now," my mother said, her voice trembling just enough to make me believe it was tender, generous, a mark of trust. My father patted my shoulder with a firmness that suggested pride, though his eyes flickered briefly toward the floor, betraying a secret he thought I wouldn't notice. I wanted to believe in the gift. After all, this was the house where I had learned to ride my bike, where birthdays overflowed with laughter, where the walls themselves seemed to echo the love of decades. To me, accepting the house was more than a financial milestone. It was a rite of passage, proof that I had earned a place in the continuum of our family. That evening, standing in the living room surrounded by familiar furniture and familiar smells, I felt a warmth I hadn't felt in years. The sun poured through the windows, illuminating the scratches on the floor from my younger siblings' rough housing, the faded wallpaper where I had once taped up childhood drawings, the crooked family portraits hanging just slightly off kilter. I ran my hand along the banister, imagining the years ahead, quiet mornings with coffee by the window, the laughter of friends and family filling the rooms again. Then a casual comment from my father hit me like a hammer. "Of course, there's a little work to do. You'll understand once you start digging in." His smile remained, but something in his tone made my stomach twist. My mother added, "It's just some mold issues, nothing you can't handle." I laughed, though uneasily, trusting them as I always had. Mold sounded like a small inconvenience, a repair I could make, a stain I could scrub away. But the unease lingered, gnawing at the edges of my excitement. As I unpacked a box of my childhood books, I noticed faint, dark spots near the corners of the walls, subtle, almost invisible. I chalked it up to age, to the seasons passing through an old house. Over the next few days, I sifted through papers in the dusty office my parents had left behind. There, in between old tax forms and utility bills, was a stack of documents I wasn't supposed to see. Insurance claims, contractor reports, letters from environmental inspectors, all outlining a nightmare I had never imagined. Toxic mold, structural damage, costs that no one in their right mind would pass along lightly, and at the bottom, in bold, unforgiving numbers, $154,000. My chest tightened, my hands shook. How could they have done this? All the warmth, all the nostalgia, all the trust. It was a lie, a carefully wrapped trap. They hadn't gifted me the house. They had passed me a burden, disguised as love. I wanted to scream to confront them, to demand answers. But I knew it wouldn't change the reality staring me in the face. This home, the place I had once considered sacred, had become a battlefield before I even had a chance to step inside. That night, lying awake in my old bedroom, I stared at the ceiling, replaying every moment, every laugh, every promise. The betrayal felt like a physical weight pressing down on my chest. I had always believed family meant protection, loyalty, and care. Now I understood that some bonds could be twisted into instruments of cruelty. And in the quiet, suffocating darkness, I realized something else. If they thought they could trap me in debt and despair, they had underestimated me. Because the story of this house and of their betrayal was far from over. The next morning, the house felt different. I walked through the rooms like a ghost in a memory, each step echoing against walls that had once been safe, now whispering secrets of neglect and deceit. The smell hit me first, damp, musty, almost sour, a subtle stench that had somehow eluded my childhood senses. It was faint, yet insistent, crawling into my nose and settling in my lungs, a reminder that my parents' gift was not just a house, but a cage laced with poison. I called a contractor, expecting minor repairs. Instead, I was met with a grim assessment. Mold throughout the crawl spaces, water damage behind walls, weakened floorboards, and a remediation cost that mirrored the terrifying figure I had glimpsed in the documents, $154,000. Every number on that page etched into my mind like a scar. How could they have hidden this from me? How could the people who were supposed to love me, who were supposed to protect me, knowingly pass this burden along as if it were a blessing? I wandered through the attic, tracing my fingers along dust-covered boxes. Old toys, forgotten school papers, family photographs. They seemed to stare back at me, silent witnesses to a betrayal I wasn't ready to name aloud. Memories I had cherished for years now felt tainted. The laughter that had once bounced between these walls now carried the echo of deceit. I confronted them over the phone. My mother's voice trembled, rehearsed excuses slipping through rehearsed concern. We didn't know how serious it was. We thought you could manage it. My father was quieter, distant, offering only vague words about unavoidable circumstances. Lies dripped from their voices like poison. I could feel my anger building, not the quick flare of temporary rage, but a slow, consuming burn that sank into my bones. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the darkened living room, staring at the corners where the mold had begun to creep. It wasn't just physical decay. It was symbolic of everything that had rotted beneath their carefully constructed facade. The home I had loved, the sanctuary I had imagined, was now a constant reminder of their betrayal. My mind raced, alternating between despair and fury. The unfairness of it all clawed at me. I had spent my life trusting them, defending their decisions, believing in their integrity, and they had traded my faith for profit, for convenience, for their own selfish escape. But despair was not all I felt. Somewhere beneath the rage, a strange clarity began to form. The mold, the debt, the betrayal, it was not just a curse. It was a challenge, a test of how far I could go, how strong I could be, how clever I could become. They had underestimated me. They believed that passing along the poisoned legacy would crush me, and perhaps for a moment I felt that weight. But I also realized that this was my story now, not theirs. I could fight, I could expose, I could reclaim what they had tried to taint. By the time the sun rose, I had made a silent vow. I would not let this house, and the people who had tried to destroy me, define the limits of my life. If they wanted a war, I would give them one, but it would not be reckless. It would be deliberate, calculated, and unforgettable. Because sometimes the most beautiful revenge begins in the quietest moments of heartbreak, when the world seems to have abandoned you, and all that remains is fire in your chest and a mind sharpened for justice. The house no longer felt like mine, yet I couldn't leave it behind. Every creaking floorboard, every dark corner held a reminder of their betrayal, and in that lingering resentment, a plan began to form. If they had thought they could pass along toxic debt and walk away unscathed, they had miscalculated. I would not fight blindly. I would fight smart. I spent hours poring over the documents I had discovered, tracing the mold reports, insurance papers, and contractor estimates. Patterns emerged, prior warnings ignored, corners cut, remediation delayed for years. My parents had not only been negligent, they had actively concealed the truth. Every bill, every inspection, every letter was now a weapon in my hands. The quiet fury that had taken root during those sleepless nights began to sharpen into a clear strategy. I consulted lawyers specializing in property and environmental law, learning about the small loopholes and protections often overlooked. I discovered that if I documented the damage thoroughly, they could be held accountable, not just morally, but legally. Photographs, professional reports, and meticulous records became my armor. I walked through the house daily, measuring, photographing, noting every blotch of mold, every crack in the walls, every floorboard weakened by moisture. The more I uncovered, the more I realized the depth of their deception. They hadn't gifted me the house. They had offloaded a liability, expecting me to absorb the cost silently. But as the truth crystallized, so did my resolve. I wouldn't just survive this betrayal. I would turn it into something they could never anticipate. I reached out to former tenants, neighbors, and contractors who had worked on the property years ago. Their stories confirmed the pattern. My parents' deliberate inaction had put everyone at risk. The walls of the house, once a sanctuary, were now a ledger of wrongdoing. I compiled everything into a file so thick it could crush anyone who dared ignore it. And in the quiet of the night, when the house was still, I imagined delivering it to the right hands, not out of spite alone, but out of justice. Even as I planned, a deeper, more personal reckoning simmered inside me. I thought of the birthdays, the family dinners, the laughter that had once seemed eternal. It pained me that the people who should have nurtured those memories were capable of such calculated betrayal. But that pain, too, became fuel. I was no longer the naive child who trusted blindly. I was a strategist, a storm brewing quietly, waiting for the perfect moment. And yet, revenge was not my only thought. I also imagined reclaiming the house not as a gift, but as a triumph. If they thought this home would define my suffering, they were wrong. Every corner, every beam, every shadowed room would bear witness to my resilience. I would restore it, or at least turn their deception into a story they could not rewrite. By the end of that month, the quiet storm had transformed into something palpable. I wasn't merely plotting, I was preparing. Every step I took, every call I made, every document I filed brought me closer to the moment when the tables would turn. And I knew, without doubt, that when that day came, the betrayal that had once threatened to crush me would instead become the very force that ensured my victory. The fire inside me was steady now, cold yet fierce. I had learned the hardest lesson of all. Those who think they can hide behind love and trust often forget that the wronged can wield those very bonds as weapons. And when they do, the reckoning is nothing short of unforgettable. The day I finally made my move, the house felt electric, charged with the quiet tension of years of betrayal. I had spent months building my case, collecting evidence, and strategizing every step. I wasn't seeking petty vengeance. I wanted accountability. I wanted the truth laid bare. Most of all, I wanted them to realize that the gift they had disguised as generosity had been nothing more than a calculated betrayal. I began with a formal legal notice, outlining the full extent of the mold, structural damage, and the documented negligence. Every photograph, inspection report, and contractor assessment was attached. The letter was concise, unemotional, almost clinical, a stark contrast to the chaos their deception had created in my life. The lawyers confirmed that they could face significant financial consequences, not only for failing to disclose the damage, but also for endangering tenants and residents over the years. Then came the final act. I made the evidence public in a controlled way, alerting neighbors and relevant authorities. It was careful, calculated, and irreversible. The story of the toxic home and the hidden debt spread quietly at first, like the mold that had haunted every corner of the house, but it was undeniable. Friends, neighbors, and professionals began to look at my parents' actions with scrutiny. The power of the truth, cold, unyielding, and precise, was now in my hands. I watched as their carefully constructed world began to unravel. The calls started, excuses offered, defensiveness flared, but it was too late. I had transformed their deceit into consequences, their manipulation into exposure. They were forced to confront the reality they had tried to bury, and the satisfaction of knowing that they could no longer hide was almost tangible. Yet amidst the victory, there was a strange emptiness. The house still bore the scars of betrayal, the dark corners, the lingering smell of mold, the floors weakened by neglect. Restoring it would take time, patience, and resources, but I knew that this effort was mine alone, a reclamation of something they had tried to taint. I walked through each room, touching the walls, remembering the laughter, and acknowledging the betrayal. It was bittersweet, a place of both pain and power, loss and resilience. Over the following weeks, I began the slow process of restoration. I hired specialists to remove the mold, repaired the damaged walls and floors, and repainted the rooms that had once held only memories. Every brushstroke, every repaired beam, became a silent testament to my strength. I was no longer the child who had been deceived. I was the one who rebuilt, who reclaimed what was rightfully mine, both materially and emotionally. The parents attempted to reach out, apologies fumbling through phone lines, but I didn't answer. Trust, once shattered, cannot be pieced together with empty words. Their lessons had been cruel, but they had also been transformative. I had learned that betrayal could be a catalyst for growth, that deceit could ignite resilience, and that the strongest victories were those achieved with both intelligence and patience. Standing in the restored living room, sunlight streaming through the freshly cleaned windows, I allowed myself a small, quiet smile. The house was mine not as a gift, but as proof of survival and strength. The debt had been neutralized, the betrayal exposed, and the power reclaimed. And though scars remained, both in the home and within me, they were reminders not of weakness, but of triumph. Sometimes justice doesn't roar. Sometimes it whispers quietly, patiently, and then strikes with the precision of truth. And in that whisper, I finally felt free.